I'll protect him, Clara said, her voice quiet but absolute, cutting through the disbelief like a blade through silk. Her fingers, small, delicate, the hands of a woman who scrubbed floors and folded linens, tightened around the leather armrest, as if anchoring herself to a decision that could not be undone. At the defendant's table, Victor Crow, the tattooed mafia boss whose own seven-figure lawyer had just walked out the courthouse doors, turned his head and stared at her with raw, unfiltered shock. I pray that everyone who watches this video, subscribes, and leaves a comment will receive the very thing their heart has been searching for, whether it's peace, clarity, healing, or a breakthrough they've been waiting on. Please don't forget to drop a comment and tell me how this story made you feel. None of them knew that this simple moment would mark the beginning of the unraveling of one of the most sophisticated corporate conspiracies in modern organized crime. Before we dive into this explosive story of loyalty, betrayal, and silent warfare, let me know in the comments. Do you believe that protection can come from the most unexpected places? And if you think stories about hidden warriors deserve to be told, don't forget to like and subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens when a maid becomes a shield. Now, let's see what drove a woman trained to kill, yet living as a shadow, to step into the light at that exact moment. But before everything exploded into chaos, what do you think made Clara, someone who had spent years erasing her own existence, suddenly declare herself as the most visible target in the room? The late autumn air in Manhattan was crisp and unforgiving, filtering through the tall arched windows of the federal courthouse and casting long golden streaks across the polished marble floors. It was 6:47 a.m., and Clara Bell had already been working for nearly 2 hours. She was a 28-year-old woman with dark hair pulled back into a severe bun, her brown eyes downcast and carefully neutral, dressed in the simple black and white uniform of domestic service, the kind of woman people looked past without seeing. The courthouse was her weekly assignment, a rotation Victor Crow's estate manager had arranged months ago as part of her community visibility duties. The cramped studio apartment in Brooklyn she'd left at 4:30 a.m. that morning was a study in minimalism, a single futon, a portable hot plate, a locked storage chest beneath the floorboards, and one photograph on the otherwise bare wall. It was a picture of 5 women in tactical gear, faces blurred, standing in front of a nondescript building somewhere in Southeast Asia. In the photo, Clara, then known by a different name, was the second from the left, barely 20 years old, her eyes harder than they were now. She didn't keep the lights on when she left home. Old habits. The kind of habits that kept you alive when your former employer was a ghost agency that no longer existed, and the people who remembered your face were either dead or hunting you. Clara had chosen Victor Crow's mansion carefully. She needed the anonymity that came with serving a man so powerful, so infamous, that no one looked twice at the help. She needed the fortress of his reputation to be her camouflage. What she hadn't planned for was the loyalty, or the love. Clara's hand was iron around Victor's wrist as she pulled him through the courthouse's rear corridor. The judge had granted them 30 minutes. 30 minutes before the world collapsed entirely. Victor was still trying to process what had just happened, his brain catching on the image of his maid standing in a federal courtroom, declaring herself his protector, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Service elevator," Clara said, her voice clipped and efficient. Gone was the soft deference, the downcast eyes. She moved like water through the empty hallway, her body language completely transformed. "The main exits will be covered." "Covered by who?" Victor demanded, but she was already keying in a maintenance code on a dented metal panel he'd never noticed before. The elevator doors opened with a reluctant groan. "By whoever paid Marcus Finch to walk out," she said, yanking him inside. The doors closed. The elevator descended with agonizing slowness. Victor stared at the woman beside him, Clara Bell, who served him coffee every morning. Clara Bell, who never met his eyes. Clara Bell, who was currently checking something concealed in the folds of her uniform with the practiced efficiency of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. "Who the hell are you?" She didn't answer. The elevator shuddered to a stop at the loading dock level. Clara's hand moved to his chest, pressing him against the wall. "Stay behind me. When I move, You move. Understood? He should have been angry. He should have asserted control. Instead, Victor Crow, who'd spent 20 years commanding men twice his size, found himself nodding. The doors opened onto the loading dock's dim concrete expanse. Morning light filtered through the gaps in the metal shutters. A civilian sedan was parked near the exit ramp, probably some clerk's forgotten vehicle. Clara scanned the space with the methodical precision of a trained operative, and Victor felt something cold settle in his stomach. They made it 3 steps before the ambush. 3 figures materialized from behind the support columns, black tactical gear, faces obscured, weapons raised with professional calm. No shouting, no warnings. Just the smooth, efficient choreography of people who killed for a living. Clara moved before Victor could process the threat. She shoved him sideways with enough force to send him sprawling behind a concrete barrier, and then she was moving. A blur of black and white that shouldn't have been possible in a maid's uniform. The first assassin never saw her coming. Clara's hand flashed to her thigh, producing a blade that had been strapped there all along, and she was inside his guard before he could fire. The knife found the gap between his vest panels with surgical precision. He dropped without a sound. The gunshot that rang out didn't come from the assassins. Marcus Finch stumbled into the loading dock from the interior stairwell, his expensive suit torn and bloodied, a service pistol trembling in his hands. He fired again, not at them but at the ceiling, the sound echoing like thunder, drawing attention, buying seconds. "Run!" Finch screamed. And then the second assassin's weapon barked twice. Finch crumpled. Clara was already engaging the second attacker, her movements impossibly fast. She redirected his rifle with one hand, drove her knee into his solar plexus, and used his own momentum to slam him face first into the concrete pillar. Victor heard the crack of breaking bone. The third assassin was smarter. He abandoned his rifle and rushed Clara with a combat knife, clearly trained in close quarters. But Victor Crow hadn't survived 2 decades in the syndicate by being helpless. He surged up from behind the barrier, grabbed a loose piece of rebar from a construction pallet, and swung it like a baseball bat into the man's knee. The assassin went down howling. Clara finished him with a brutal elbow strike to the temple. The entire fight had lasted less than 30 seconds. Victor staggered toward Marcus Finch, who was gasping on the concrete, blood spreading across his white shirt in a bloom of dark red. Clara was there first, kneeling beside the dying lawyer with surprising gentleness. "They took my daughter," Finch whispered, his hand clutching Clara's arm. "Showed me pictures, said they'd kill her if I didn't walk. I'm sorry. I'm so—" He coughed, blood on his lips. His eyes found Clara's with desperate urgency. "The Council of 8, Sterling Global. They want you both erased, not just Victor. You, Clara. They know who you are." Clara's face went absolutely still. Finch's grip weakened. "They're everywhere. Trust no one. No one." His eyes glazed. His hand fell. Clara closed his eyes with 2 fingers, a gesture almost reverent. Then she stood, grabbed Victor's arm, and hauled him toward the civilian sedan. "Keys are under the mat. Get in." "Clara, what the hell is—" "Get in the car, Victor." He got in the car. Clara drove like she'd been trained by someone who knew that speed limits were polite suggestions and traffic laws were optional. She took corners that made Victor grip the door handle, ran 2 red lights, and navigated through side streets he didn't know existed. Blood was seeping through his shirt from where he'd scraped his shoulder in the fall, but he barely felt it. Finally, she pulled into the underground garage of a nondescript apartment building in Queens, the kind of place even the syndicate wouldn't think to look. "Safe house," Clara said quietly, killing the engine. "No one knows about this. Not your men, not your enemies. Just me." Victor looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a woman he'd never met before. "Who are you?" he asked again. Clara Bell turned to face him, and for the first time in 3 years she met his eyes directly. "I'm the person keeping you alive," she said. "And right now, that's all that matters." Victor's fever broke on the 3rd night, leaving him weak but lucid enough to hate his helplessness. He watched Clara change his bandages with the clinical efficiency of someone who'd done this 100 times before, and wondered how many of those times had been for people she'd later killed. "You're holding your breath," she said without looking up from the gauze. "It'll hurt less if you breathe through it." He exhaled slowly, studying her face for any hint of the woman who'd served him tea with downcast eyes and murmured apologies. That woman had never existed. This one had steady hands and a pocket full of fake passports, and right now she was the only thing standing between him and a grave. "I hate this," he said. "I know." She secured the bandage and stood, gathering the soiled dressings. "But you're healing faster than expected. Another week and you'll be mobile enough to be dangerous again." The shift between them was complete. No more sir, no more deference. She spoke to him like a handler managing an asset, which he supposed was exactly what he'd become. The irony would have been amusing if it didn't make him want to put his fist through a wall. While he slept fitfully through the days, Clara worked. He'd wake to find her hunched over the laptop at the kitchen table, the screen's glow painting her face blue in the pre-dawn darkness. She'd commandeered the safe house's encrypted network, running searches that filled the screen with documents and financial records that blurred together in his morphine-addled vision. "What are you looking for?" he asked one morning, his voice still rough from disuse. "Proof," she said simply. "The prosecution's case against you was built on financial records, tax fraud, money laundering, the usual suspects. But I saw those records during the trial. There was something off about the formatting." Victor pushed himself up against the headboard, ignoring the protest from his healing wounds. "Off how?" "Subtle. The kind of thing you'd only catch if you knew what real offshore accounting looked like." She pulled up a document, zooming in on a series of numbers. "See this transaction code? It uses a cipher format that wasn't standard until 2 years after this transfer allegedly took place. Someone created these records recently and backdated them. So the evidence was fabricated, we knew that." "Yes, but fabricated by whom?" Clara's fingers flew across the keyboard. "I've been tracing the digital fingerprints, following the metadata back through the shell companies. Every dead end leads to another shell, another layer of corporate camouflage. But whoever built this maze made one mistake." She pulled up a new document, this one dense with corporate filings and registration data. They reused the same incorporation lawyer for 3 different shells in the chain. And that lawyer has exactly one other client of note, Sterling Global. Victor felt something cold settle in his chest. Sterling Global. The name had been whispered in his circles for years, a corporate entity that moved through industries like a shark through shallow water. Real estate, shipping, waste management. Anywhere cash flow could be controlled and redirected. "They're not mafia," he said slowly, understanding crystallizing. "They're legitimate. On paper, anyway. Legitimate enough that when they decided your territory was more valuable without you in it, they didn't need to start a war." Clara clicked through more files, each one another piece of an intricate puzzle. They convinced the justice system to do their wet work for them. Cleaner that way, no bodies, no blowback, just a very public trial and a mob boss removed from the board. She turned the laptop toward him, and Victor found himself staring at a ledger. But not just any ledger. This one detailed payments made from a Sterling Global subsidiary to a list of names that made his blood run cold. Judges, police chiefs, federal prosecutors, each one annotated with dates and amounts, a careful accounting of purchased justice. "The Council of 8, Clara said. That's what Sterling calls their board of directors. 8 men who decided your syndicate was worth more to them than you were to your own people." Victor's hands clenched into fists, pulling at his stitches. The pain helped him focus through the rage. "I need to make a call." Clara handed him a burner phone without argument. "Keep it brief. Even encrypted, someone might be listening." He dialed from memory, waited through 3 rings and heard Sal Maroney's familiar voice. "Yeah? It's me." A pause, just a fraction too long. "Boss, Jesus, we thought... Where are you?" "Somewhere safe." Victor watched Clara's face, saw her frown at something in Sal's tone. "How's the family?" "Holding together. We've been keeping things quiet, waiting for word. Too smooth, too rehearsed. What do you need? I need you to sit tight. Don't make any moves until I say so. Can you do that for me, Sal? Of course, boss, whatever you need. The eagerness in Sal's voice was like acid in Victor's ear. We're ready when you are. Victor ended the call and handed the phone back to Clara. Well? She asked. You were right, he said quietly. Paranoia is the only rational response. She almost smiled. Welcome to my world. The ledger Victor needed was hidden in the last place anyone would think to look, behind a loose brick in the furnace room of his former headquarters, sealed in waterproof plastic alongside his grandfather's wedding ring, and enough cash to disappear 3 times over. He'd put it there the night before his arrest, some animal instinct warning him that the walls were closing in. You told Sal we'd be here in 2 hours, Clara said as they approached the building through the service alley. It was 3 in the morning, the kind of dead hour when even the city seemed to hold its breath. If he's loyal, the building will be empty. If he's not, then we'll know, Victor finished. His side still ached where the stitches pulled, but he could move without doubling over now. Progress. Even if it came wrapped in constant low-grade agony. Clara had her hair pulled back, dressed in black that seemed to drink the shadows. She moved like smoke beside him, checking corners with the automatic precision of someone who'd survived by never assuming safety. Victor felt clumsy next to her, too large and too loud despite his years of moving through the criminal underworld. The building was dark. Victor's key still worked in the service entrance, which meant either Sal hadn't bothered to change the locks or wanted to make this easy. Neither option was comforting. They moved through the familiar halls in silence. Victor led, Clara a half step behind and to his left, positioning herself to react to threats from any angle. The furnace room was in the basement, accessible through the old kitchen where Victor's mother had once made Sunday gravy for 30 people at a time. The brick came loose easily. Victor's fingers found the plastic package, pulled it free. Inside, the ledger was exactly as he'd left it. A small notebook filled with his own handwriting, documenting every payment, every deal, every name that mattered. The real accounting, untouched by Sterling Global's forgers. Got it, he whispered. That's when he heard the footsteps above them. Clara's hand shot out, gripping his arm. Her eyes had gone flat and dark, and Victor realized with a chill that he was looking at someone else now. Not Clara the maid, not even Clara the handler. This was the Wraith, the woman who'd earned her reputation one silent kill at a time. The footsteps multiplied, 6, maybe 8 people, moving with tactical precision through the building above. They weren't here to talk. Sal, Victor breathed, and felt something cold and final settle in his chest. His second in command, his trusted lieutenant, the man who'd stood beside him for 15 years, bought and paid for by Sterling Global, probably promised Victor's entire operation in exchange for one simple betrayal. Clara was already moving, pulling him toward the back exit. But the door burst open before they reached it, and Victor saw the barrel of a suppressed rifle swing toward his chest. He moved on instinct, throwing himself sideways. The shot caught him high on the shoulder instead of center mass, spinning him around. He hit the concrete floor hard, the ledger skittering from his grip. Then Clara was between him and the shooter, and Victor watched his understanding of violence get completely rewritten. She moved like water, like something that couldn't be touched. The rifle came up, but she was already inside its arc, her palm striking the shooter's throat with surgical precision. The man's windpipe collapsed with a wet crunch. He was dead before his finger left the trigger, but Clara was already pivoting toward the next target. 2 more came through the door. Clara caught the first one's wrist as he raised his weapon, twisted it until something snapped, and drove her thumb into the nerve cluster behind his elbow. His arm went dead. She used his momentum to swing him into his partner, then struck twice, once at the base of the skull, once at the kidney. Both men dropped without a sound. Victor tried to stand, but his shoulders screamed protest. Blood was spreading across his shirt, warm and slick. He could hear more footsteps coming, more boots on concrete. Clara didn't pause. She picked up the fallen rifle, ejected the magazine, dismantled it in 3 smooth motions. Useless. She preferred her hands anyway. The next wave came from two directions. Clara went low, sweeping the first man's legs, catching him as he fell and using his body as a shield against the second shooter. The suppressed shots thumped into dead meat. She let the body drop and close the distance before the shooter could adjust his aim. What followed was brutally efficient. A strike to the solar plexus, knee to the groin, elbow to the temple. The man crumpled. Clara moved to the next target, her movements economical. Each strike placed with the precision of someone who knew exactly how to make a body stop working. Victor watched through a haze of pain and blood loss as she dismantled the hit squad. 5 men, 6, 7. She killed them all in near-perfect silence, each death measured and necessary, and utterly without mercy. When the last body fell, she was back at his side, checking his wound with steady hands. "Can you walk?" she asked. Victor looked up at her, this woman who'd served him tea and folded his laundry and just killed 7 men without breaking a sweat. His arrogance, his pride, his certainty in his own power. It all seemed absurd now, childish. "I trust you," he said, and meant it completely. She helped him to his feet, retrieved the ledger, and guided him toward the exit. Behind them, the basement held its dead in silence. The second bullet wound was worse than the first. Clara worked in silence, her hands steady as she extracted the fragment lodged against Victor's collarbone, cleaned the channel, and stitched him back together with the methodical care of someone who'd done this too many times to count. Victor didn't scream. He'd learned that much at least. Screaming accomplished nothing. Instead, he gripped the edge of the table hard enough to make the wood creak and focused on breathing through the white-hot agony that radiated from his shoulder. "You're getting a collection," Clara said, tying off the last stitch. "At this rate, you'll be more scar tissue than man." "Story of my life." Victor's voice came out rougher than he intended. His shirt was ruined, discarded on the floor in a heap of blood-soaked fabric. In the harsh light of the safe house, his torso was a roadmap of old violence, knife wounds, bullet scars, the puckered burn from a car fire 10 years back. Each one a reminder of how close he'd come to dying before. But those scars were professional hazards, the cost of doing business in his world. This felt different, personal. Sal's betrayal had cut deeper than any bullet. Clara cleaned her hands in the sink, watching him with those unnervingly calm eyes. "The ledger confirms everything. Sterling Global has been buying pieces of the justice system for at least 5 years. Judges, prosecutors, police commanders. Your trial wasn't justice, it was a hostile acquisition with legal paperwork. And now we have proof." Victor looked at the small notebook sitting on the table. Its pages filled with his own handwriting. Documentation of every deal, every payment, every name that mattered in his organization. But proof doesn't mean anything if we can't get it in front of someone who matters. "No," Clara agreed. "Which is why we're going to use one of them." She pulled up a photo on her laptop. Judge Raymond Castellano, the man who'd presided over Victor's trial. 73 years old, 40 years on the bench, a reputation for being incorruptible that had made him the perfect choice to legitimize Victor's conviction. "He's in the Sterling ledger," Clara said. 3 payments over 2 years, routed through a shell company that owns his lake house. Not enough to make him rich, but enough to ruin him if it came out. Victor studied the judge's face, remembering how Castellano had looked at him during the trial. Not with hatred or disgust, but with something worse, disappointment. As if Victor's guilt was a foregone conclusion, a stain on the judge's otherwise pristine courtroom. "You want to flip him." "I want to give him a choice." Clara's smile was thin and cold. "Fear is a powerful motivator, but self-preservation is even stronger. We don't need him to be a hero. We just need him to give us a procedural loophole, a way to introduce the ledger as evidence without Sterling's people blocking it immediately." The meeting happened in a parking garage at dawn, the kind of anonymous concrete space where secrets got traded and lives got ruined. Clara had chosen it carefully. No cameras, multiple exits, enough ambient noise to defeat listening devices. Judge Castellano arrived exactly on time, walking with the careful dignity of a man who knew his world was about to collapse. Clara watched him from the shadows, reading the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes darted to the exits. She stepped into view. The judge stopped, his hand moving toward his pocket. Phone or panic button, probably. Don't, Clara said quietly. The word carried absolute authority. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to offer you a choice. She held up a tablet, turned it so Castellano could see the screen. His own financial records, annotated with dates and amounts. The lake house purchase, the payments from the shell company, the paper trail that connected him directly to Sterling Global. The judge's face went gray. You can't, this is inadmissible, illegally obtained. I'm not interested in admissibility, Clara interrupted. I'm interested in survival, yours and mine. She moved closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Sterling Global used you to eliminate Victor Marconi. They needed a judge with a spotless reputation to make the convictions stick. But now that conviction is falling apart, and when it does, do you think they'll protect you? Or will you become a liability? Castellano's hands were shaking. What do you want? A procedural loophole, nothing that would make you obviously complicit. Just a narrow window during the appeals process where new evidence can be introduced without the prosecution getting advance notice. Something technical, defensible, that gives us 24 hours to get this ledger in front of people who can't be bought. That's... The judge closed his eyes. You're asking me to subvert my own courtroom. I'm asking you to save your life, Clara corrected. Sterling has 8 people on their board. 7 of them won't hesitate to throw you under the bus if it protects their interests, but if you help us bring them down, I'll make sure your name stays out of it. You'll be the judge who got manipulated, not the one who got bought. The silence stretched between them. Victor, watching from a distance, could see the calculation happening behind Castellano's eyes. Pride versus survival, legacy versus prison. Finally, the judge nodded. There's a provision in the appellate code, Rule 437, subsection C. If material evidence emerges that wasn't available during trial, there's a 48-hour window where it can be submitted directly to the appellate panel without prosecutorial review. Clara smiled. That'll do. The evidence came together like pieces of a weapon being assembled. Clara spread everything across the safe house table. The original ledger, copies of Sterling Global's falsified records, the judge's financial documents, transaction records that traced the web of corruption back to its source. Victor watched her work, cataloging each piece with the methodical precision of someone building a case that couldn't be dismantled. It has to be perfect, she said, not looking up. One loose thread, and they'll unravel the whole thing. The appellate panel will have 48 hours to review before Sterling's lawyers can respond. We need to make those hours count. Victor's shoulder throbbed, a reminder of how close they'd come to losing everything. Even if the panel sees it, they need someone to deliver it to, someone Sterling doesn't own. Clara paused, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. I know someone. Federal Marshal Thomas Vance. He worked a joint task force with my old firm 5 years ago. Anti-corruption, completely by the book. The kind of man who'd rather quit than compromise. You trust him? I trust that he hates dirty cops more than he hates people like you. She pulled up a file, showed Victor a photograph of a man in his 50s with iron gray hair and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much and forgiven too little. He's based out of the federal building downtown. If we can get the evidence to him, he'll make sure it reaches the right people. And if Sterling gets to him first? Then we're dead anyway. Clara closed the laptop. This is the play, Victor. We don't have another one. The contact was made through encrypted channels, a series of coded messages that would mean nothing to anyone monitoring the traffic. Vance agreed to meet at a neutral location, a diner on the edge of the city where federal agents sometimes had coffee and pretended the world wasn't falling apart. But before they could move forward, Victor needed answers. Tell me about the firm, he said that night, watching Clara clean her pistol with the same careful attention she gave everything else. The one you fled from. Her hands stilled. For a long moment, Victor thought she wouldn't answer. Then she set the gun down and looked at him with those pale eyes that seemed to see straight through all his defenses. Sentinel Security Solutions, private military contractor, black operations, the kind of work that doesn't officially exist. I was one of their cleaners, the people they sent when someone needed to disappear and no one could ever know why. She spoke quietly, clinically, like she was describing someone else's life. We operated in 40 countries. I killed 73 people over 6 years. Some of them deserved it. Most of them were just inconvenient. Victor felt something cold settle in his chest. What happened? I found out our largest client was using us to eliminate witnesses in a trafficking operation. Children, Victor. They were selling children, and we were the ones making sure no one could testify about it. Her voice stayed level, but her hands had curled into fists. I went to my superiors. They told me to stand down, that it was above my clearance level. So I burned the entire network to the ground and disappeared before they could do the same to me. How long have you been running? 3 years. Different cities, different identities, always moving before anyone got close enough to recognize me. She met his eyes. Until I found you. Or you found me. I'm still not sure which. Why stay? You could have kept running. Clara was quiet for a moment, considering. Because you were supposed to be simple. A job, a cover, something temporary while I figured out my next move. But then I watched them frame you, watched them use the system like a weapon, and I realized. She trailed off, searching for words. I spent 6 years killing for people who called it justice. Maybe protecting you is the closest I'll ever get to the real thing. Victor reached out, caught her hand. The touch was tentative, careful, like they were both afraid of what it might mean. We're a pair, aren't we? The mob boss and the government assassin. Former, Clara corrected, but she didn't pull away. Both of us. The moment broke when her phone buzzed. She checked it, and Victor saw her expression shift into something harder, more dangerous. Vance confirmed the meeting. Tomorrow, noon. She looked up at him. But there's something else. My old contacts picked up chatter. Sterling's activated a contractor. Goes by the Ghost, elite tier. The kind they use for high-value eliminations. Coming for me. Coming for both of us. Clara stood, already calculating angles and contingencies. They know about the courthouse transport tomorrow. They know we're running out of time. So they're going to hit us when we're most exposed, when you're being moved for the hearing. Victor felt the familiar cold focus settle over him, the same feeling that had kept him alive through 2 decades of gang wars and power struggles. But this time, it was different. This time he wasn't alone. Then we'd better be ready, he said. Clara smiled, and it was the smile of someone who'd walked through hell and learned to like the heat. We will be. The armored van looked exactly like a standard prisoner transport. Gray paint, reinforced doors, the kind of vehicle that moved criminals through the city every day without anyone looking twice. That was the point. Clara had spent 2 days modifying it, reinforcing the chassis with military-grade plating, upgrading the engine, installing run-flat tires that could take a magazine of rifle rounds and keep moving. Victor sat in the passenger seat, the ledger sealed in a waterproof case on his lap. His shoulder still ached, but the pain had become background noise, something he could function through. Clara was behind the wheel, her face calm, eyes constantly moving between the mirrors and the road ahead. They'll hit us on the expressway, she said. Open sight lines, multiple exit points, easy to control the traffic flow. If I were planning it, that's where I'd do it. And you're still taking this route? Because they'll expect us to avoid it. Sometimes the obvious play is the right one. She checked the rearview mirror again. Besides, I've got insurance. Victor didn't ask what she meant. He'd learned to trust Clara's plans even when they seemed suicidal. The expressway was relatively empty for mid-morning, which should have been reassuring, but instead made Victor's instincts scream warnings. Too quiet. Too convenient. Clara felt it too. He could see it in the way her hands tightened on the wheel, the subtle shift in her posture that meant she was preparing for violence. The first vehicle came from the on-ramp, a black SUV that accelerated hard to match their speed. Victor saw the window roll down, saw the barrel of an assault rifle emerge. "Down," Clara said calmly, and yanked the wheel hard right. The van swerved across 2 lanes as bullets sparked off the armored plating. Clara cut left, using the SUV's momentum against it, forcing the driver to overcorrect. The SUV clipped the median barrier and spun out. But there were already more coming. 2 more SUVs from behind. A panel van blocking the exit ahead. Professional. Coordinated. Exactly what Victor would expect from someone called the Ghost. Clara accelerated into the blockade. Victor braced himself, certain they were about to crash, but at the last second she hit a button on the dashboard. The panel van erupted in a fireball, the shaped charge Clara had planted during her reconnaissance 12 hours earlier, turning the vehicle into shrapnel and flame. She drove through the gap before the debris finished falling. "Jesus Christ," Victor breathed. "There's more." Clara's voice was utterly steady, like she was commenting on the weather. She took the next exit at 70 miles per hour, the van's tires screaming as they hit the turn. The pursuing SUVs followed, still firing, rounds punching into the rear plating. The city streets were narrower, more chaotic. Clara used every inch of space, weaving through traffic with surgical precision. She clipped a taxi's bumper, used a parked delivery truck as a screen, took a corner so tight Victor felt the van rise onto 2 wheels before slamming back down. One of the SUVs tried to match the turn and rolled, metal shrieking as it tumbled across the intersection. The second SUV was better. Its driver matched Clara move for move, staying close, while the passenger leaned out with a rifle. Victor saw the muzzle flash, felt the impact as a round punched through the rear window. The glass held, bulletproof, another of Clara's modifications, but it wouldn't last forever. Clara made a sharp right into an alley, too narrow for the SUV to follow safely, but its driver tried anyway. Metal scraped against brick as both vehicles barreled through the confined space. Clara reached down, grabbed something from beneath her seat, and tossed it out her window without looking. The explosion wasn't large, but in the narrow alley it was devastating. The SUV's front tire disintegrated, sending the vehicle careening into the wall. Clara didn't slow down, emerging from the alley onto a wider street, but the Ghost wasn't done. A motorcycle appeared from a side street, rider dressed in black tactical gear, and Victor caught a glimpse of the sniper rifle strapped across the rider's back. This was their primary hitter, the one Sterling had paid premium rates to ensure Victor never made it to the courthouse. The motorcycle wove through traffic, closing fast. Clara made another turn, heading for the warehouse district. Abandoned buildings, empty lots, terrain she'd chosen carefully. "The rifle," she said, "under your seat." Victor found it, a Remington 700 with a scope, the kind of weapon he'd kept locked in his office safe for special occasions. He'd wondered where it had gone after his arrest. Now he knew. "You can't drive and shoot," he said. "I'm not going to." Clara slammed the brakes, spun the wheel. The van executed a perfect J-turn, ending up facing back the way they'd come. "You are." The motorcycle was 50 yards out and closing. Victor rolled down his window, brought the rifle up, ignored the screaming protest from his wounded shoulder. He'd grown up shooting, had learned from his father how to lead a moving target. The scope found the Ghost. Victor exhaled, squeezed the trigger. The round caught the motorcycle's front tire. The bike went down hard, sparks flying as it skidded across pavement. The rider rolled, came up in a crouch, but Clara was already moving again, accelerating past the fallen mercenary. In the side mirror, Victor saw the Ghost reach for a weapon, then think better of it. The message was clear: retreat or die. They chose retreat. Clara drove the final 3 blocks to the federal building in silence. Agent Vance was waiting outside, flanked by 2 U.S. Marshals with their hands near their weapons. Victor handed over the case containing the ledger. Vance opened it, scanned the contents, and nodded. "The appellate panel convenes in 2 hours, Vance said. "I'll make sure they see this." Clara and Victor walked into the courthouse together, past security, past the metal detectors, into the marble halls where justice was supposed to live. Victor's hands were shaking slightly, adrenaline finally catching up with him. Clara's hands were perfectly steady. The courtroom had transformed overnight into something resembling a fortress. Federal marshals lined the walls, their hands resting casually near their weapons, their eyes scanning the crowd with mechanical precision. The usual lawyers and court officials moved through the space with unusual stiffness, as if aware they were walking through a minefield. Clara sat in the second row, dressed in a charcoal blazer and pressed trousers. No uniform, no insignia, nothing to mark her as anything more than another concerned citizen. But everyone who mattered knew exactly who she was. Victor Crow sat at the defense table, his shoulders squared for the first time in weeks. His attorney shuffled papers with trembling hands, clearly aware he was a prop in a much larger production. Clara caught Victor's eye and gave him the smallest nod. He returned it, then faced forward as Judge Harrison entered the chamber. Harrison looked older than he had 2 days ago. The lines around his eyes had deepened into crevasses, and his jaw worked constantly, grinding teeth that had probably kept him awake through sleepless nights. He took his seat with the careful movements of a man handling explosives, his gaze sweeping across the courtroom and snagging just for a moment on the CEO of Meridian Consolidated sitting in the gallery's front row. The CEO smiled, a thin, proprietary expression that said he owned everything in this room, including the man in the black robe. "We are here," Harrison began, his voice scraped raw, "for the final evidentiary hearing in the matter of the people versus Victor Crow." He paused, swallowing hard. "The defense may proceed." Clara stood smoothly, drawing every eye in the room. She walked to the defense table and placed a slim drive on its surface, such a small thing to contain so much ruin. Victor's attorney, following the script they'd rehearsed, cleared his throat. "Your Honor, the defense wishes to submit previously undisclosed evidence obtained through lawful means under Statute 47B, subsection 12, which permits late discovery when such evidence comes to light through independent civilian investigation." The courtroom erupted. The counsel's prosecutor, a sharp-faced woman named Delacroix who'd never lost a case, shot to her feet. "Objection! Your Honor, this is a transparent attempt to circumvent discovery rules. Whatever evidence they claim to have is clearly improperly obtained, likely illegally so, and cannot possibly have been acquired through legitimate civilian channels." "The statute is clear," Victor's attorney countered, his voice gaining strength from Clara's presence behind him. "Any citizen may report criminal activity to the court. The evidence speaks for itself." Harrison's hand shook as he reached for his water glass. He drank, then set it down with exaggerated care. I need to review the precedent." "There is no precedent needed," Clara said quietly, her voice carrying perfectly through the silent chamber. She wasn't supposed to speak, she wasn't counsel of record, but no one stopped her. "The law is unambiguous. Evidence of criminal conspiracy can be submitted by any party at any time, even..." And here she let her gaze drift toward the CEO, "when that conspiracy reaches into the highest levels of corporate and governmental power." Delacroix's face went white. "Your Honor, I must insist." "The evidence will show," Clara continued, speaking directly to Harrison now, "a pattern of judicial intimidation, evidence tampering, and coordinated efforts to secure a wrongful conviction. It will show wire transfers, communications, and operational directives. Everything." She paused, letting the word hang. "Everyone." Harrison's eyes met hers, and in that moment she saw him perform the calculation. She saw him weighing his mortgage, his pension, his daughter's college fund against something infinitely heavier, his own reflection in the mirror every morning for the rest of his life. She held his gaze, unblinking, a silent promise written in her expression. "Your name can be on the right side of this, or it can be in the evidence too." His hand steadied. "I'll allow it," he said, his voice suddenly clear. "Submit your evidence." The drive was loaded. The screens flickered to life, and within minutes, the courtroom watched the architecture of corruption laid bare. Every payment, every threat, every manipulation. The CEO's smile dissolved. Federal marshals moved toward him with practiced efficiency. Delacroix collapsed into her chair, her face buried in her hands. In light of this evidence, Harrison said, his voice ringing with something that might have been redemption, all charges against Victor Crow are dismissed. Furthermore, I am ordering the immediate arrest of... The CEO was already being led away in handcuffs, his expensive suit rumpled, his face a mask of disbelief. Victor Crow stood, free for the first time in months, tears streaming down his weathered face. Clara slipped out through the side door before the chaos fully erupted. She had 17 more names on her list. The war wasn't over, but she'd won this battle. The basement of the old Crow estate smelled of mildew and ancient fear. Victor Crow descended the concrete steps alone, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space where his father had once conducted the family's darkest business. Sal Maroney knelt in the center of the room, his hands zip-tied behind his back, his expensive suit stained with the evidence of 3 days in captivity. "Victor," Sal croaked, his voice hoarse. "Victor, please, I can explain. The council, they had my daughter. They had everyone's daughter," Victor said quietly, stopping 3 feet away. "They had everyone's son, everyone's mortgage, everyone's secret. That's how they worked." He pulled the pistol from his waistband, not a showpiece, just a working tool. "But you didn't come to me. You didn't trust me to protect you. Instead, you fed me to them. I had no choice. There's always a choice." Victor chambered around. "You chose wrong." The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Sal Maroney, consigliere to 3 generations of Crows, crumpled to the concrete. Victor holstered the weapon and walked back upstairs without looking back. Some betrayals didn't deserve ceremony. The rest of the dissolution took 3 weeks. Victor met with every captain, every lieutenant, every soldier who'd sworn the old oaths. Some he pensioned off with enough money to disappear into legitimate life. Others, the ones too steeped in the old ways, the ones who'd profited from the rot, he handed over to Clara's remaining contacts in law enforcement. Federal agents she trusted, prosecutors who still believed in something beyond their next promotion. By the end of the month, the Crow Syndicate existed only in memory and sealed case files. Victor stood in his study, now stripped of its ostentatious furniture and mobster affectations, when Clara entered without knocking. She'd changed from her courtroom clothes into dark tactical pants and a fitted black shirt, not quite civilian, not quite military, something entirely her own. "It's done," he said, not turning from the window. 30 years of my family's empire, dismantled in less than a month. You sound relieved." "I am." He finally turned to face her. "I've spent my entire life being what my father built, maintaining what my grandfather started. I wore their crown because it was expected, not because I wanted it." He moved toward her, his movements careful, as if approaching something precious and potentially dangerous. "You showed me another way. You showed me that power doesn't have to be about territory and tribute, it can be about precision. About purpose." Clara remained still, watchful. "What are you saying, Victor?" "I'm saying I don't need a syndicate anymore. I need you." He stopped an arm's length away. "Not as my housekeeper, not as my protector, as my partner. I'm building something new. Legitimate security consulting, corporate investigation, the kind of work that uses everything we know about how power really operates, but does it within the law. Mostly." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "I need someone who understands both worlds, someone who can move between shadows and courtrooms, someone who won't hesitate when hesitation costs lives." "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you everything I have left." His voice dropped. "My trust, my loyalty, my life, if you'll protect it. Not because you're paid to, but because we're building something together." Clara studied him for a long moment, this man who'd been born into darkness and was choosing, against all his conditioning, to walk toward the light. Not pure light, neither of them were built for that, but something cleaner than the mire he'd inherited. "Chief of Security and Strategic Operations," she said finally. "Full operational authority, no questions about methods, no second-guessing in the field. Done." "And Victor?" She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the silver flecks in her gray eyes. If you ever lie to me, if you ever go back to the old ways without telling me first, I won't quit. I'll end it myself. I know, he said simply. That's why I'm asking. 3 months later, they stood on the balcony of the rebuilt mansion, no longer a fortress of gaudy intimidation, but a sleek, modern structure with security measures so sophisticated they were invisible. Clara wore tactical black, her sidearm holstered at her hip, her hair pulled back in a practical braid. Victor stood beside her in a tailored charcoal suit, his shirt collar open enough to reveal the edge of the tattoos that marked his past, the crowned crow on his neck, the dates and names that chronicled a life he'd chosen to transcend but would never deny. Below them, the city sprawled in twilight gold. Somewhere in those streets, the council's remnants scrambled to reorganize. Somewhere, new threats were evolving, new predators circling. Let them come, Clara said quietly, as if reading his thoughts. Victor glanced at her. This woman who'd infiltrated his life as a servant and become his salvation. They will. I know. She smiled, a warrior's smile, sharp and certain. I'll be ready. They stood in comfortable silence, two people who'd found in each other not redemption, but purpose. His world and hers had merged into something neither could have built alone, a kingdom defended, not by numbers or territory, but by absolute, lethal loyalty. He was her charge, she was his shield, and God help anyone who tested either of them again. Thank you so much for watching this story. If this video touched your heart even a little, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps me keep creating stories that inspire, heal, and remind us that kindness still exists in this world.